Hello, and welcome back to One Idea Way. I'm Hayden, and today I want to spend some time with a book that has stayed relevant for almost 2,000 years. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius wasn't meant to be published. It wasn't meant to teach or persuade. It was his notebook, a private space for a person to think clearly in the chaos that is leading an entire country. That matters because Marcus Aurelius wasn't a philosopher sitting comfortably on the sidelines of his campaign. He was the emperor of Rome. He commanded armies, he ruled millions of people, and he lived under constant pressure. Yet, page after page, he reminds himself of the same thing. You are not in control. That's the idea I want to build this episode around. Not as a slogan, but as a way of seeing the world differently. We're told constantly to take control of your life, control your future, control your brand, control your trajectory, control your narrative. And at some level, that advice makes sense. Discipline matters, effort matters, but Marcus Aurelius makes a sharper distinction. He separates what feels controllable from what actually is. Reputation is not yours. Outcomes are not yours. Other people's opinions, timing, luck, injuries, opportunities, none of that belongs to you. What belongs to you is far smaller and far harder. Your thoughts, your choices, your standards, your response to what happens. That's it. And when you accept that, something interesting happens. You stop wasting energy. A lot of stress today doesn't come from difficulty. It comes from misplaced responsibility. We take responsibility for things that were never ours to begin with. We internalize outcomes as reflections of our own worth. Marcus is constantly warning himself against that trap. He writes about how events themselves are neutral. It's the judgments we attach to them that cause the stress. That's not a comforting idea, it's a demanding one because it removes excuses. If you're angry, frustrated, anxious, Marcus would ask, what judgment did you just make? What expectation did you attach to reality? And that question's uncomfortable because it forces honesty. It asks whether you're really reacting to what actually happened or what you thought should have happened. Another thing Marcus does repeatedly is strip situations down to their raw components. He refuses to let emotion inflate reality. Fame in his mind is just noise. Insults are just sound waves, and setbacks are temporary because they're just a way to learn. At first, that can feel cold and dismissive, but the purpose isn't to numb yourself to change, it's to regain clarity, because clarity is what allows discipline. Now, Marcus Aurelius is obsessed with discipline, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind where you do what's required without needing to be seen doing it. He constantly reminds himself to act according to reason and principle, not mood, not impulse, not ego. And that matters because impulse and ego are fragile. One of the most consistent warnings in meditations is letting your identity depend on external validation. Marcus understands that the moment your sense of self is tied to winning, praise, or approval, you've handed your control away. You become reactive. You chase affirmation. You fear failure not because it matters, but because it threatens your image. Marcus wants none of that. Instead, he argues for internal independence, a kind of self-respect that doesn't require an audience. Now, that doesn't mean withdrawing from the world. He didn't step down from power or disengage from responsibility. He stayed fully involved with everything he did, but internally, he refused to be owned by his outcomes. And that's a hard balance to strike, honestly. I mean, coming from competitive environments where results matter, outcomes often seem like they matter more than the process, but Marcus draws a clear line in this. The effort is yours, the outcomes are not. You are responsible for showing up prepared, acting honestly, doing the work, treating others fairly, maintaining discipline under pressure, and trying your hardest, but you are not responsible for how the project responds. When you confuse those two, things fall apart. Success turns into arrogance, failure turns into bitterness, and both distort your judgment and a way of thinking about what should have happened rather than what really did. Another idea Marcus returns to again and again is impermanence. Everything fades. People weaken, empires fall, names are forgotten. And that sounds bleak, I guess, but what this does for Marcus psychologically is that it removes false urgency. It makes you precise with your energy. If everything passes, then what's worth your effort right now? Not everything deserves your attention, not every insult deserves a response, and not every setback deserves emotional collapse. Marcus doesn't argue for detachment, he argues for selection. Care deeply about what's in your control, treat everything else lightly. And that mindset changes how pressure feels. Pressure stops being something that you need to accept and becomes something that you endure with structure. Marcus also talks about duty, not in a moral way or some thing you have to do, but in a practical one. Every person has a role to play, and meaning comes from playing that role well. Not impressively, not perfectly, just honestly. That idea reframes motivation. You don't act because you feel inspired. You act because it's what the situation requires of you. Now, that might seem like underachieving or just shooting for what you can get, but it's strength. It's reliable strength because it's something you can consistently do. One of the most powerful parts of meditations is how often Marcus reminds himself that no one is watching the way he thinks they are. Fame is temporary, praise is of the past, criticism fades, so why let your behavior be dictated by it? That question still hits me today personally because so much of modern life is performative. We're encouraged to narrate our own growth, brand our discipline, and broadcast our effort for personal gain. Marcus would find that unnecessary and maybe even honestly dangerous because he's not interested in appearing disciplined, he's interested in actually being disciplined. And that's the final idea for today's episode that I want to land on. Real power isn't control over your circumstances, it's control over yourself when the circumstances can't cooperate. And that's the kind of power that doesn't announce itself, it doesn't fade away with time, it doesn't demand your attention, but it lasts. Because when things go wrong, and they always do, you're not scrambling to regain something you never had. You're already here, you're steady, you're grounded, and you're focusing on what's actually yours to command. Meditations isn't a book that motivates you for a day. It trains you over time, quietly, repeatedly, without drama, and maybe that's why it's lasted so long, because if there's one thing that meditations makes hard to ignore, it's that most of the stress we experience comes from trying to control things that we can't. Marcus Aurelius isn't asking you to care less, he's asking you to care more precisely. Like, do the work that's in front of you, act with discipline, hold yourself to standards that don't depend on praise, outcomes, or recognition, and when things don't go the way that you planned, don't treat that as a personal failure. Treat that as part of the conditions that you're meant to operate with. And that's what steadiness comes from. It's not confidence, it's not having some crazy motivation, but it's consistency. It's consistency under pressure. Control over outcomes is an illusion. Control over your response is something you will always be able to control. Thanks for listening to One Idea Away.